Hello and welcome to this episode of Timeless Topics. This is part one in a two-part series on showing up whole in a broken system. In this episode, we discuss everything from individual agency within a system to adaptations healthcare providers choose to survive. We're so excited you're back with us, and let's go ahead and jump into the conversation. But what it's like to show up whole in a broken system, right? Because I think that's where the crux of hope and realism and accountability lie, right? Because you have to have hope to continue to show up, but it's easy to get bogged down in all the negative because there is a overwhelming amount of it. And kind of sitting there and thinking like, okay, the system is bad, the system is bad, the system is bad. I don't think there's a healthcare worker in any role that would argue that it's not, But then sometimes that's where it stops. We just accept that the system is bad, it's broken, without kind of pushing ourselves to think, well, systems are built from individuals. So if individuals change, then systems will change. But they can't change based on one individual. Like we need a coalition of people, right, to be able to change this. And that's what I find so motivating and hopeful and, dare I say, slightly optimistic in my work in trauma-informed care is if we can spark this fire and get this grassroots like swell of people, then the system has to change, right? Like, I mean, maybe I'm delusional, but I'm going to hold on to that delusion until I'm like proven different,
Yeah.
Because I feel like if we hold systems accountable, then they can change. They don't have to be this entity that is above reproach. But I think most of us have lived in whatever system we're talking about, whether it's political systems, healthcare systems, the education system, even things with the isms, right? Like racism, homo, all those things. We've lived in those systems for so long, we didn't have to watch them be built.
Yeah.
So that it makes us kind of complacent and thinking that, well, you trust the system. Well, but the system was designed to not benefit everybody. It was designed to benefit a specific set of people. And that set slightly shifts depending on which system you're talking about, but there's still that kind of hierarchy that's built in. And it was just glaringly apparent while I was, in the hospital with my family member to just be like, wow, we have a lot of work to do. Like, how do we do this? What do we do to turn this around? Because as a healthcare provider, almost more so than as a family member, it was an overwhelming amount of grief to watch work that I love and am so passionate about not hit the mark, you know? To no true fault of an individual, but the individual still has agency to choose to do something,
Yeah. But hearing you talk, it makes me think that this is part of the generational conflict, right? Because those of us who have been doing this for a minute remember some of the good aspects of healthcare back in the day, right? For fear of sounding, oh, back in the day. Was it always perfect? No. But we've definitely seen things evolve and change over the years as technology has evolved, as we have become more dependent on that technology, more dependent on our checklist, more dependent on making sure that our patients give us a 10 at the end of the day, right? And that's based on the checklist, not actually because we care about those patients, but because we need those numbers. And so I think as an older, more experienced clinician, when you see the younger ones come through who this is all they know. And so again, no fault of their own, just like you said, it is the system. And it's the same with all of the other isms that you talked about. When you come into it and that is all that you don't see why that's wrong. You don't see how it could be different. It takes someone coming in saying, we can make a change. It can be different. There is another way that we can still get to the same result, which is our patients having great outcomes, our patients being satisfied with the care, but ultimately improving their health, right? And so from a generational standpoint, we have to find a way to be able to spout that knowledge, that information to our younger peers without sounding judgmental, without sounding old, without sounding like I'm scolding you. I'm just trying to say, yo, there's a way that we can still do all of these things but change the healthcare system. And again, it's going to take a lot, but every one little person who does it makes a difference because that one person is then going to be seen by someone else who's going to begin to model that, and it's going to slowly trickle out. But maybe that's my optimism seeking some
Well,
ideas.
we gotta have optimism, right? Because without that, we're just left with despair. So like
Mhm.
you gotta have a little bit of something, even if it is delusional sometimes. I think the younger generation are more ready for it than sometimes we give them credit for. But it has to be modeled, it has to be mentored, it has to be like sewn into them, right? Because we know as in adult learners, period, and as people that are new to a field or any kind of specialty, they're going to be task-based in the beginning. And
Mhm.
because they're hearing so much of the this checklist, this, thing in the EMR, you didn't document this within 35 seconds, so now I got to talk to you, like, all of those things they get overwhelmed with the task-based nature and forget that you're doing all those tasks to a human being, you know? And then I find that often out of safety, they'll kind of detach themselves from that and will defer to other people. It was one of my challenges when this family member was in the hospital was I would ask her a question and it was, I'll get the doctor to give you a clinical update. I was like, this isn't a clinical update question. Like, this is something that is fully within your scope to explain to me or answer. But you have removed yourself from this connection so much that you're just deferring your expertise altogether. And maybe it's because you never learned it, it was never modeled for you. Or maybe you put your neck out and got slapped a few times and now you're not going to, right? Like there's so many elements to this. Because I also had some very seasoned nurses who played the same cards.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people I was able to connect with the most were the people who at least sounded younger. It's people I talked to on the phone. Typically, your night shift staff is younger, right? And they were the ones that were, a little more willing to talk. Now, it could be because I used my nurse educator voice and, they felt like they could answer me, but it was kind of shocking to me sometimes the dichotomy between it. And it was again that thing of like walking away as a professional development person of like, well, what do I do with this information? And how can I instill it in all generations of nurses? Like, definitely it's exposure in the beginning, but how do I cultivate it in established people too?
Yeah. I think both of you guys are calling, kind of calling out that there are lots of different layers to this issue. And I think the fact that both of you guys expressed hope and optimism is wicked awesome. And does, keep that light shining at the end of a super, super, super long tunnel. But I think, the layers that have evolved over time that are a reflection of multiple sources of hierarchical influence, right? Like, I mean, if you think about kind of the origins of healthcare, medicine, and that sort of thing, way, way back, I mean, before I think any of us were even a glimmer in anybody's mind or anything, and healthcare providers and healers would go to the homes of individuals who were seeking health. And then all of a sudden, we started shifting things and bringing the sick people who have the least amount of reserves to make the journey to see a healer to do that as healthcare began to become commodified and then of course at the whim of I don't know, like, I'm going to say the word powerful entities that may or may not have anything to do with the healing practices, with the healing sciences. And then you bring all of these really heart-centered, loving, compassionate individuals into a system now that's kind of, I mean, when you were describing it, Jessi, earlier, I thought of a system as it was heartless. It's just this hollow entity that has been kind of, I don't know, like I don't know. I don't know the right word, but like taken over. Yeah, maybe it's taken over um, by by systems that don't really appreciate it, and all of that filters down. And so people that may have come with a full heart and really wanting to be a healer got put in their place, like you said, these, seasoned nurses, and that kind of forward rush of the patriarchy in medicine, comes full on front and center. Sidebar, I had this really nice dinner with a group that I was invited to speak at out in California, and one of the physicians talked about just by default, physicians are privileged people, that many of them, because we were talking about trauma-informed care, probably struggle, maybe, I mean, again, saying generalizations here, right? But probably struggle with even getting their head wrapped around somebody else's suffering and all that kind of stuff. So all of these distancing things, really just kind of fall into the system, become part of the works of the system, and everybody adapts because it's a shock. It's overwhelming and traumatic to you. So you just figure out, how do I survive in this situation? I mean, I signed up for this. I went to school, I got the bills, to pay for my loans. And here I am. And you want me to do what? But I have to keep my job, and I have to, comply with the system. And so who pays the biggest price is the most vulnerable, the person at the bottom of that pyramid, unfortunately, who is the patient and the family. And if it weren't for folks like you guys, who are just fierce advocates by nature, I don't think we have the strides that we have already made, although sometimes it feels like I mean, I know we haven't done enough, but we continue to strive and do the right things and try and influence and inspire the newer folks that are coming on board. But I think sometimes we don't appreciate what their experience is in this traumatized world, and how that adaptation to that reality influences how they show up to these situations, right? That may be re-triggering, that they may be, overwhelming, they may, all of the things, right? So it is a complex, messy thing. And unfortunately, individuals pay the price, society pays the price, right? And we have sicker people, at least in the United States, right? I mean, that's just kind of the legacy of our healthcare, which is all about, we want you to be sick because we make more money when you are sick. And we don't have the skills to do much beyond that because we've been so kind of hardened. Is that the right word? Hardened by the system itself. So, but I like where you're going with this, like talking about, so how do we address this in meaningful ways? Because it is a long haul, but it absolutely can be done with a community, and as you kind of both mentioned. So I'm going to step off my box now.
Yeah, it's like capitalism strikes again, right?
Yes.
And then you have the rise of like private equity getting into healthcare and all of that, and people that are just out to see profit over person.
Mhm.
And if you talk to any nurse or provider or anybody really in a bedside facing role, they will tell you like, oh no, that's not why I'm here. Like, sure, I got to pay bills, so I hope they pay me, but like, I'm not primarily here to make this corporation a bunch of money. Like I'm here to make a difference in someone else's life. And sometimes the difference that I'm making is my own life, right? Like I'm walking away having learned or experienced something and having like a co-learning, kind of experience. But that doesn't mean that there aren't systems adjacent to or above our systems that are kind of forcing this commodification, like you said before, of looking at somebody as, oh, you have XYZ diagnosis. I can expect you to stay in the hospital XYZ days, which means it's XYZ revenue. And I mean, yeah, if you stay a couple extra days, that's not too bad, but not too many extra days, because then we got to figure out why. And can I fine you for that? And, all of these things. And while I'm a fan of standardization in a good sense, right? If someone's doing it well, share, so we all can.
Yeah.
But you can't standardize to the point that now you can't individualize anymore.
Right.
And you can't meet the needs of the patient that's actually in the bed because you're beholden to the checklist, the audits, the whatever, right? And it's a really hard position to be in from a clinical educator place, because I understand the reasons for audits and tracers and stuff like that. But you can't be so beholden to the results of those things that you forget the human factors on both the provider and the patient side.
You made me think of this word as you were speaking. I think these systems actually exploit the compassionate hearts of the healers that come, whether it's nurses, therapists, physicians, and over time, right? Again, that is a traumatic experience, right? When your authentic compassion and loving, giving nature isn't it is rewarded or reduced to a commodity, right? Here, I give you a check, you show up, you got a license and a pulse, right? I mean, I'm sure everyone has heard that expression, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, you know what? Just because you got a license and a pulse, I'm not too pumped about you, showing up or picking up that extra shift. But we've stripped away that piece of the value, and it plays out in critical situations when families are in dire straits and need that compassion, need that relationship, need that communication and the sense of safety that all of that brings. And unless you're blessed to be, have a family member who's an educator and knows the workings behind the scenes, you literally can be up the creek without a paddle.
So
Yeah.
how do we, as a faculty, how do we teach this? How do we help our next generation be those change agents that we so desire them to be?
Don't you think a lot of it is empowerment, Tracy? I mean, like,
Mm.
because when you were saying, Jess, about some of the even the seasoned nurses kind of like, oh, well, let me get the doctor or let me, do that. And people say, at least I can only speak to nursing from a professional lived experience, right? But people continue to say, I'm just the nurse. Where the heck did that come from? I mean, I think it's a bit influenced by the misogyny that is, kind of pervasive in our society. So I'm already, because I have worked with male nurses and I don't see some of those same behaviors. And again, generalizations, but I don't see some of those same behaviors that I see in my female nursing colleagues. But I don't know, Tracy. I mean, you can do all the skills, but I think you're speaking to something that it can feel intangible, but there are skills around, right? Acting with agency and being an advocate and how does that get incorporated into an undergraduate curriculum?
Yeah, I think empowerment for sure, right? But it's like informed empowerment, maybe. Like it's kind of guarding them with lived experience stories, right? Of sharing what it's like, role playing, even though we know I like to rebrand it as simulation, right? But like role playing this aspect of like, I want you to empathize with what this is. And everybody, sometimes I'll hear people, oh, you can't teach empathy, you can't teach critical thinking, but you absolutely can teach both. You need something to start with, right? Of course, there are, pathological things where that's challenging, but most your average BSN student is not going to fit that category, right? So it's finding a way to motivate them outside of grades, right? Outside of keeping that 4.0 and all of those things, because a lot of people, it's very driven, it's very competitive to get into a lot of programs, despite this like huge need for people to stay at the bedside, although many people would argue we actually have a lot of nurses, they just don't want to deal with the system, right? They're working in other places. So it's not necessarily a lack of nurses, it's a lack of people willing to work in the systems in which they're beholden to. So, but as you get people into those systems, you empower them to connect with their own experiences and lived experiences from other people to use that as a catalyst to change, to sharpen their critical thinking, to feel safe and required almost to escalate concerns, rather than just say, oh, well, that's a day shift problem. Or, the doctor, he came around earlier. I'm sure he'll be back. You should bring that up to him when he comes in. And you're like, I should bring it up to him. You're the one that can call him. Hell, you can secure chat on Epic now. Like, what do you mean? You have more access than I do, but I'm supposed to be the one to remember all of this in the throes of trauma? And sometimes the I'm is the family, sometimes it's the patient themselves. Um, and it's finding a way to model it for them and also let them see that it's a duty almost. You chose a caregiving and a care supportive profession, which means that sometimes you're gonna need to step into a little bit of discomfort to change the system, right? And to benefit this patient.
But you said something that made me really pause. You said in the throes of trauma. And I know we talk about trauma-informed care and it is a huge topic in NICU, right? But when you said it, it kind of hit me. It's like, oh yeah, right? When this family member is asking you a question, despite what we think they are going through, that is a trauma moment for them. And we need to respond back appropriately, especially if we stop and think about how we respond in a trauma. Can you remember all the things that we're telling you to remember? It makes me think about when we are going in to do prenatal consults. And again, we have a checklist. Here are all the things that I need to tell you. I've always wondered, has anyone done a study to see how much of that our families remember? How much of that do they really take forth with them to the NICU? And when they then come in and say, nobody told me that, we get so offended. We're like, yes, we did. I came to talk to you. It was 2 in the morning. Okay, first of all, it was 2 in the morning. Really? Dude. And
Mhm.
in the throes of trauma,
Yeah.
right? So, what are we really doing? And even on that particular topic, and here's my tangent, right? Because now my brain is over here. Is that something that we need to be investigating and really evaluating the best ways to empower, again, that word, our families and help them be able to advocate.
The whole thing about, the trauma and how your brain shuts down, that in and of itself has been well studied, and there's, really good understanding about the fact that if, first and foremost, if you don't feel safe and you don't feel seen, your cortex is not online. And you can look to some of the polyvagal research and the neurosequential model and stuff like that. And so, but I think nobody gets taught that, right? I mean, people don't understand that when I'm in the throes of overwhelm, and it does get a little amped up at 2 in the morning, but when I'm overwhelmed and I'm sleepy and I'm in pain and all of these things, just because your lips are moving doesn't mean I am hearing anything. But I think I like the fact that you called it out. We do get defensive though, and we do, feel like we have to vindicate ourselves. And it's like I mean, not that grown-ups are, children, but I mean, it would be like me trying to, have an argument with a 2-year-old, I mean, when I think about trying to have an argument or defend myself against somebody who is in a life-threatening situation, who's critically ill, and stuff like that, and I'm gonna win this argument. Kind of like where's your head at? But again, I think that speaks to that that erosion of your sense of self and your sense of worth. And actually, I've seen this word and in some of the literature around racial and ethnic disparities and chronic stress. Um, and I don't know if it's an appropriate term for this. You guys have to tell me. Weathering. And I thought, wow, what a good word it felt to capture that the chronicity of that chronic toxic stress that individuals navigate over a lifespan, and how it wears you down, and 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 being in a system, working, and having kind of your hopes and dreams maybe at least cracked, if not shattered, because this isn't what I thought being a nurse was going to be like, but I'm in it. I need it, I need a job. I'm doing these things. You start to kind of, I think, your armor up a little bit. And I say these things not as an excuse, but I say them kind of maybe trying to understand, what is happening to these individuals. And I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I left because it was too much. I couldn't take the BS anymore. It just felt so overwhelming and out of alignment with what it was that I signed up for. So, and I think we see this a lot. I think we see this a lot, particularly in critical care environments, and I say that just because of my background, but I'm sure on the floor, work in med surge. I mean, I can't ever imagine doing that. So I think that there's, again, a lot of moving parts that we don't prepare people, kind of coming back to you, Trace, around that faculty opportunity is we don't prepare people. If if we don't prepare them, then they may not see any opportunities for transformation or for change, or that they can act with agency to make things better. Because maybe they just feel like, oh, this is what it is. And I'm going to use all my reserves, whatever I've got left, to just adapt and fit in because I need a job. I need to, all the things. I don't know.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Timeless Topics. We welcome your feedback and suggestions, so please reach out. Our handle on all social media platforms is @TimelessTopicsNICU, and our email address is timelesstopicsnicu@gmail.com. See you next time.